Most decluttering advice was written for someone 30 years younger with a body and an energy level that isn't yours anymore. Japanese seniors approach this differently, not gentler, more honest. 15 rules, blunt and specific, for what actually needs to leave your home after 50 and why waiting costs more than most people realize. Not a weekend project, not a personality flaw, just 15 honest truths, one at a time. 15. The 12-month truth. Somewhere in your home is a shelf, a drawer, or a whole cabinet full of just in case. The extra slow cooker still in its box, the fondue set from a party a decade ago, the jacket 2 sizes too small, kept for a version of your body that isn't coming back. Here's the rule, stated plainly. If you haven't used it in the past 12 months, you will not use it in the next 12 either. The seasons already came and went once without it. They'll do the same again. This isn't about being careless with things that still have life in them. It's about being honest. Pick up the object and ask one question. Would I go out and buy this again today, knowing what I know about my life right now? If the answer is no, the object already told you what it is. A woman clearing her kitchen pantry last year found 4 unopened bottles of a specialty vinegar she'd bought for a single recipe, years apart, having forgotten each time that she already owned one. 3 of the 4 still had the price tag on. But that's not thriftiness. That's a just-in-case that quietly became 4. Before we go further, think of one thing in your home right now that fits this rule exactly. Keep it in mind. I'll ask for it again at the end. There's a Japanese concept worth knowing here, Mottainai, a genuine discomfort with waste. It's often misused to justify keeping unused things indefinitely, but applied honestly, it points the other way. 4 unused bottles of the same vinegar is the waste, not the act of finally releasing 3 of them. Mottainai isn't about hoarding against some future need. It's about actually using what you have fully, instead of storing it as a substitute for using it. 14. Nothing stays on the floor between you and the door. This is the least negotiable rule on this list, and it deserves to be said directly. Falls are the leading cause of injury-related death for adults over 65, and roughly 1 in 4 older adults falls every single year. Not a scare tactic, a documented fact. Most of those falls don't happen on a hiking trail or an icy sidewalk. They happen at home on something ordinary. A stack of boxes by the door, a rug with a curling edge, a basket of shoes spilling into a hallway. The exact walkways used every single day, worn so familiar they've become invisible. In Japanese homes, the entryway, the genkan, is treated as a threshold that stays completely clear, always, without exception, not for aesthetics. Because a cluttered threshold is the first place a fall happens, and the one place in a home that gets crossed the most times in a day. Walk your main path today, bedroom to bathroom, living room to front door, and clear it completely. Not organize it. Clear it. This is the one rule on this list where good enough isn't good enough. It's worth doing this walk with fresh eyes rather than familiar ones. Ask someone who doesn't live in the home to walk it with you, or simply use your phone's flashlight and look at the floor specifically rather than the room generally. Most people can describe their living room from memory in detail and still completely miss the extension cord crossing the walkway or the small rug that's been slowly curling at one corner for months, precisely because familiarity is what makes a hazard invisible in the first place. This rule also isn't a one-time fix. A cleared path today can quietly collect a stack of mail, a pair of shoes, a grocery bag within a week if nothing else on this list is protecting it. Treat the main walkway the way you'd treat a smoke detector. Checked, not assumed. Nighttime deserves particular attention here, since it's when a cluttered walkway becomes genuinely dangerous rather than just inconvenient. A nightlight along the path from bedroom to bathroom costs almost nothing and removes one of the most common conditions under which a nighttime fall actually happens. Not clutter alone, but clutter combined with darkness and a half-awake mind navigating from memory instead of sight. 13. A memory doesn't live in the object. There's a box somewhere in your home. An attic, a closet shelf, the back of a drawer, holding something that belonged to someone you loved. A watch, a glove, a handwriting on an old card. You haven't opened it in years, and you can't quite bring yourself to either. Here's the truth this rule asks you to sit with. The memory isn't stored in the object. It's stored in you. The object is just where you've been keeping it because letting the object go has felt wrongly like letting the person go, too. Take a photograph of it in good light on a table where you can actually look at it clearly. Write one sentence about what it meant. Then let the object itself go to someone who will use it or simply release it. What you'll find almost universally is relief, not loss. The photograph holds the memory exactly as well as the box did. It just doesn't take up a shelf doing it. A man going through his late wife's jewelry found himself keeping nearly all of it, boxed, untouched, for 11 years. When he finally photographed each piece and gave most of it to his daughters and granddaughters, he said the house didn't feel emptier. It felt like she was being worn again instead of stored. There's an important distinction worth being precise about. This rule isn't asking you to release everything sentimental. A small number of genuinely meaningful items, actually displayed and actually seen, do something a box in an attic never can. The rule is really about the difference between an object honored and an object merely stored. The first earns its space by being present in your life. The second just accumulates, indistinguishable from all the other boxes around it, doing nothing for the memory it was supposed to protect. There's a specific kind of quiet guilt worth naming here, too. The sense that donating something too good to give away feels wasteful in the opposite direction, as if the item deserves a more deserving recipient than a general donation bin. Mottainai applies here in its truest sense. An object's value is honored by it actually being used by someone, not by it waiting indefinitely in your home for a use that never quite materializes. 12. Stop storing it for the kids. An attic full of high school yearbooks, trophies, and boxes of toys your children left behind decades ago, kept because they might want it someday. Except someday rarely comes, and your children, now adults with their own homes, mostly don't know or don't remember that any of it is still there. The rule is direct. If your grown children haven't asked for something in years, they don't need it stored on your behalf. Call them. Tell them exactly what you have and give them a real deadline, 2 weeks, a month. What isn't claimed by then gets donated or released without guilt. Most people who do this are surprised by how little gets claimed and how little that surprises their kids. The things weren't being kept for them. They were being kept out of a sense of obligation that nobody but you was actually holding on to. There's a version of this rule that applies even when a child says yes, they do want something, and it's worth naming honestly. Yes, I want that, and yes, I'll come get that this year, are two different commitments, and only one of them actually clears your attic. Set a real pickup date as part of the yes, the same way you would with anything else on this list. An item claimed but never collected is still, functionally, your storage problem. This rule is worth applying with real gentleness rather than resentment, even though the framing is direct. Most adult children aren't ignoring their childhood things out of indifference. They're simply living full, forward-facing lives of their own, the same way you were at their age. The attic isn't a test of how much they still care. It's just storage that's overstayed its welcome, waiting on a conversation that's easier to have than most people expect once it actually starts. 11. Every undecided item gets a decision, not a shelf. The hardest part of clearing anything isn't the objects you clearly want to keep or clearly want to release. It's the pile in between, the items you genuinely can't decide about in the moment. The rule, anything that reaches 30 seconds of genuine indecision doesn't get set back down undecided. It goes into a single box, and that box gets a real date written on a real calendar, not sometime, an actual day, 90 days out. When that day comes, the box gets opened first thing before anything else. If you went looking for something in that box during the 90 days, it earned its place back. If you open the box and can't remember why half of it seemed important, that forgetting is the answer you couldn't reach on your own. This isn't indecision dressed up as a system. It's a system built specifically for the fact that not every decision can be made in the moment it's asked. This connects to a concept in Japanese decluttering philosophy called Danshari, a word built from 3 separate ideas: refusal of what you don't need, disposal of what's already outlived its purpose, and separation from the attachment that keeps you holding on to both. The 90-day box is Danshari with a built-in delay for the specific items where refusal and disposal can't happen in the same moment as separation. It gives the attachment time to loosen on its own, rather than demanding it disappear on command. The box itself should be modest, 1 box, not a room's worth of maybe. If the undecided pile grows larger than a single box can hold, that's usually a sign the 30-second rule isn't being applied honestly. And it's worth returning to the objects already inside it before adding more. One detail makes this system work where similar attempts have failed before. The date has to be specific enough to actually arrive on its own. In a few months never arrives because nothing marks the day it's supposed to. October the 14th, written on an actual calendar or set as a phone reminder, arrives whether or not it's been thought about since. The difference between those 2 phrasings is often the entire difference between a system that works and a box that just becomes one more thing sitting around indefinitely. 10. Your home should reflect who you are now. A drawer of office supplies from a career that ended over a decade ago. A shelf of hobby equipment for something you haven't touched since your 40s. A closet holding clothes that fit the job, the body, or the life you used to have, not the one you're living today. None of this is a character flaw. It's simply what happens when a home keeps accumulating evidence of every version of a person it's ever held, without ever being asked to update to the current one. The rule is a single honest question asked of anything that feels oddly persistent in a home. Is this part of my life today, or is it a remnant of a life I've already moved past? If it's the second, it isn't failing you by leaving. It already did its job in its time. Letting these categories go tends to feel different than expected, less like losing a piece of the past, more like finally being surrounded by a home that matches who's actually living in it now. A retired accountant kept a full drawer of business cards, a company-branded planner, and a calculator from a job that ended 12 years earlier. None of it was sentimental in any deep sense. It wasn't tied to a person or a memory. It was simply identity, quietly preserved in office supplies long after the identity itself had moved on. Clearing it, he said, didn't feel like erasing a career. It felt like finally admitting the career was genuinely, comfortably over, and that the drawer had been the one part of the house that hadn't caught up yet. This rule tends to apply most to entire categories at once: 1 drawer, 1 closet section, 1 shelf, rather than single items scattered throughout a home. Look for the concentration, not the individual object. Where has an old identity settled into its own dedicated space? That space is usually where this rule has the most to offer. 10 rules in. If one of these has already made you think of a specific drawer, closet, or box, that's not a coincidence. Tell me which one in the comments. It helps other people watching recognize the same thing in their own home. 5 rules left when they get more personal from here. 9. Guilt is not a reason to keep anything. The expensive exercise equipment that's been in the corner for 5 years, unused, quietly reminding you of an intention that didn't stick. The gift you never asked for but feel obligated to display. The half-finished hobby kit that whispers, "You should have," every time you walk past it. Objects like these don't just take up physical space. They take up a specific kind of mental space, a small recurring reminder of something you didn't follow through on, replayed every time you see them. The rule, Guilt is never a good enough reason on its own to keep something, not the money spent, not the promise made to yourself, not the thoughtfulness of the person who gave it. What matters is whether the object serves your actual life now. And an object that only serves to remind you of a shortfall was never serving you to begin with. There's a specific kind of arithmetic worth doing honestly with guilt objects. The money is already spent, whether the item stays or goes. Keeping it doesn't recover the cost. It just adds a second cost in space and in the quiet sting of walking past it. Releasing it doesn't erase the original decision to buy it. It just stops charging you for that decision every single day it stays in view. This applies with particular force to anything health or fitness related. Equipment, programs, subscriptions bought during a burst of genuine motivation that didn't sustain itself. That's not a personal failing. Motivation that fades is one of the most ordinary, well-documented human experiences there is. The object doesn't need to stay as a monument to it. There's a useful test for telling guilt objects apart from genuinely useful ones sitting temporarily unused. Ask whether the object is waiting for a specific, plausible next use or waiting to make you feel a specific way about yourself. The winter coat waiting for winter has a use waiting for it. The treadmill waiting to make you feel like someone who exercises regularly is waiting for an identity, not an event. And identities don't arrive because an object in the corner keeps insisting on them. 8. 20 minutes, not a weekend. The instinct, once you finally decide to deal with a space, is to go all in, clear the whole room in one exhausting push. For most people over 50, this backfires reliably. The body pays for it the next day, sometimes for 3, and the association that forms isn't, "I did something good." It's, "That was miserable, and I'm in no hurry to do it again." The rule, 20 minutes, one small zone, then stop. Not unless I'm on a roll. Stop. A packed spare room might genuinely take weeks this way. That's fine. The pile has already waited months, sometimes years. A few more weeks, done consistently, beats one heroic weekend, followed by months of avoidance. This is Kaizen applied directly. Small, repeatable, sustainable steps chosen specifically because they don't cost more than you can afford to spend, physically or emotionally, in a single sitting. It helps to pick the zone before the 20 minutes start, not during them. Walking into a room and deciding in the moment where to begin wastes minutes that were supposed to be spent doing, and often leads to wandering between 3 half-started areas instead of finishing one. Choose the zone the night before or that morning so the 20 minutes are pure action from the first second. 20 minutes is also short enough to genuinely finish something small, a single drawer, one shelf, the top of one dresser, which matters more than it sounds like it should. A session that ends with something visibly completely done produces a different feeling than one that ends mid-task. And that feeling is a large part of what makes someone actually come back tomorrow. 7. Give it away while you can watch it be loved. Somewhere in your home is something that would genuinely mean something to someone specific in your life. A grandchild who's mentioned your recipe box more than once. A son-in-law who'd actually use your late husband's tools. A niece who's always admired a particular coat. Most of these things end up in an anonymous donation bag instead, simply because donating feels like the default and gifting with intention feels like it requires more effort or courage than it actually does. The rule: for anything with real meaning attached, skip the anonymous route. Call the person, give it to them yourself, and tell them, briefly, why you thought of them. This is one of the only rules on this list that tends to feel like more than decluttering. People who've done this consistently describe it as one of the more meaningful conversations they've had with their adult children in years. Not because of the object, but because of being the one who got to hand it over, on purpose, while they could watch it land. This rule asks for one small piece of courage most people underestimate, actually naming why the object matters out loud to the person receiving it. I want you to have this as a gift. I want you to have this because you always admired it at Grandma's table, and I want you to have it while I can tell you that myself is a completely different kind of gift, the kind that tends to get remembered decades later, long after the object itself. Not everything needs this level of ceremony. Reserve it for the handful of items that genuinely carry weight, not the entire donation pile. A rule applied to everything stops functioning as a rule and starts functioning as a chore. There's a practical benefit to this rule that goes beyond the emotional one. Items given directly, with a specific person already identified, never sit in an ambiguous donation pile waiting for someone to eventually take them somewhere. The decision and the delivery happen in the same conversation. Nothing lingers in limbo, half-released, the way so much donation-bound clutter quietly does for months before it actually leaves the house. 6. A drawer without a job becomes a graveyard. Every home has at least one of these, a drawer or a shelf with no actual assigned purpose, which means it quietly becomes the destination for anything without an obvious place to go. Rubber bands, old batteries, a takeout menu for a restaurant that closed years ago. This drawer isn't really about the objects in it. It's about every decision that got postponed instead of made, one small item at a time, until postponement itself became the drawer's entire function. The rule: every drawer gets one job. If it doesn't have one, give it one today. And anything currently inside it that doesn't match that job gets a real decision right now, not shoved back in for later. Junk drawers are worth understanding for what they actually are, psychologically. A container for decisions too small to feel worth making individually. No single rubber band or expired coupon seems worth a real decision on its own. Multiplied across dozens of small items, that adds up to a drawer that never gets addressed, precisely because nothing inside it ever felt urgent enough to prompt it. Once the drawer has a real, named job, say, charging cables and batteries, nothing else, everything that doesn't fit that description has an immediate, obvious answer. It doesn't belong there. The job itself becomes the sorting system, which is far more sustainable than trying to remember a rule that has to be redecided every time something new drifts in. This rule scales up naturally to entire rooms, not just drawers. A spare room with no defined job tends to become a graveyard exactly the same way a drawer does, just larger and slower. Naming its job specifically, even if that job is simply guest room, gives every object entering it a test to pass before it's allowed to stay. 5. If it takes a step stool or a struggle, move it. The items used every single day, reading glasses, a favorite mug, the medication taken each morning, deserve to live somewhere genuinely easy to reach. Not on a high shelf that requires a step stool, not in the back of a low cabinet that requires kneeling and reaching. This rule matters more with each passing year, not less, and it's one most people never revisit once a kitchen or bathroom was originally set up. What made sense to reach for at 40 may quietly have become a small daily strain by 60, unnoticed simply because it's been the same routine for decades. Spend 10 minutes today moving your 5 most used items to the easiest possible reach, waist to shoulder height. No bending, no stretching, no stool. It's a small change that pays out daily for as long as you live in that space. Kitchens are usually the worst offender here precisely because they get organized once early on and rarely revisited. The everyday plates end up on a high shelf because that's where they fit 20 years ago. The pot used every week ends up in the back of a low cabinet because that's simply where it landed during the original setup. None of these placements were wrong when they were made. They just haven't been reconsidered since, even as reaching for them has quietly gotten harder. Bathrooms deserve the same attention, and for higher stakes, a step stool used to reach a medicine cabinet or a low cabinet requiring a kneel and twist motion to open are exactly the kind of everyday actions that quietly become the setting for a fall. Moving daily medications and toiletries to a single easy-reach shelf is a 5-minute fix that removes one of the more common small risks in an entire home. This rule pairs naturally with Rule 14. Both are about the physical geography of a home actually matching the body that moves through it now, rather than the one that moved through it decades ago. Neither is about admitting decline. Both are about simply being accurate about the present and building a home around that accuracy instead of around habit. Quick check-in. How many of the 15 so far are already true in your home without you ever having called them a rule? Most people land somewhere around 4 or 5. 10 more to go, or fewer, since some of these you may have already covered without noticing. 4. Someday needs an actual date. Someday is one of the most common words attached to clutter and one of the least useful, because someday, by definition, never actually arrives on a calendar. It just sits there, indefinitely, as a placeholder for a decision that keeps getting deferred. For anything genuinely uncertain, not clearly kept, not clearly released, the rule is the same one from Rule 11 worth repeating because it's the one people skip most often. A specific date written down, not a vague future intention. 90 days is enough time for real use to prove itself, and short enough that the box doesn't just become a second, quieter form of the original clutter. Someday isn't a decision. It's the absence of one, dressed up to look like patience. There is a specific reason a written date works where a mental intention doesn't. A mental someday competes with every other thought in a busy mind and reliably loses, while a date on a calendar shows up on its own without needing to be remembered. The system isn't asking for more willpower. It's asking for one small piece of infrastructure, a date written down, that does the remembering so you don't have to. If 90 days arrives and a handful of items still feel genuinely unresolved, that's allowed. Give those a second, final 30-day extension, but no further. A someday that keeps extending itself indefinitely isn't a system anymore. It's just clutter with better paperwork. 3. Clearing it once isn't the job. A space gets cleared genuinely with real effort, and 3 months later, it's drifted most of the way back to where it started. This isn't failure. It's the predictable result of treating decluttering as a single event instead of an ongoing habit. The rule? 10 minutes every evening before sitting down for the night. Whatever migrated out of place during the day, the mail on the counter, the sweater on the chair, the reading glasses that ended up in the wrong room, goes back to where it belongs. Clutter rarely returns in one dramatic collapse. It returns in 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, one thing left out that quietly invites the next. 10 minutes a night, done consistently, is what actually protects the work that already happened. Not a bigger cleanup later, a small one every single day. This habit is worth attaching to something already happening every evening, rather than treating it as a separate task competing for attention. Before turning on the television, before the last cup of tea, before getting ready for bed. Whatever already marks the transition into evening, let the 10 minutes ride alongside it. Habits anchored to an existing routine tend to survive. Habits floating on their own, waiting to be remembered, tend to quietly disappear within a few weeks. There's also a real, if understated, connection between a nightly reset and how well the day actually ends. A home that's visually settled before bed tends to produce a mind that settles more easily too. One less thing circling in the background as the day winds down, one less unfinished task waiting to be noticed again first thing in the morning. 10 minutes is a genuine ceiling, not a suggestion. If the reset is regularly taking longer, that's useful information. It usually means something bigger accumulated during the day that deserves its own 20-minute session from Rule 8, rather than being squeezed into the nightly routine and making it feel like a burden instead of a habit worth keeping. 2. A lighter home is easier to invite people into something quiet. Happens in a lot of homes over the years. Visits get smaller, less frequent, more carefully managed. Grandchildren get redirected to meet somewhere else. A knock at the door produces a flash of embarrassment before anything else. None of this usually gets said out loud, but it shapes far more of daily life than most people admit. A cluttered home doesn't just cost floor space. It costs the ease of simply saying yes when someone wants to come by. And that cost compounds quietly over years into fewer visits, fewer spontaneous moments, a little more distance from the people who matter most. Clearing even a few of the rules on this list tends to produce a specific, unexpected result. Not just a tidier home, but a genuine willingness to actually use it the way it was meant to be used. Full of people, not just full of things. It's worth being honest about the direction this causality actually runs, because it's easy to get backwards. The instinct is often, I'll invite people over once the house is ready. In practice, the house rarely feels fully ready, and the waiting becomes its own quiet, permanent postponement. A cleared main room, a clear path to sit and talk, a kitchen table with actual room for 2 cups of tea. That's ready enough. Perfection was never the requirement. Room to actually be together was. This shift tends to happen gradually rather than all at once. The first visit after clearing a main room often still comes with a small apologetic comment. Sorry about the rest of the house. By the 3rd or 4th visit, that comment tends to disappear entirely, replaced by something quieter and more valuable. Simply not thinking about the house at all, while the people who matter are actually in it. Grandchildren in particular tend to respond to a lighter home in a way that's easy to underestimate. A space with room to move, to sit on the floor, to spread out a game without knocking something over, gets used differently than one where every visit involves careful navigation around things. The home doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to be usable by the people you actually want using it. One rule left. It's the quiet one, the one that explains why the other 14 matter as much as they do. One of independence lives in your walkways, not your storage boxes. This is the last rule, and it's the one all 14 others are really in service of. Most people over 50, when asked directly, say the same thing. They want to stay in their own home, on their own terms, for as long as possible, not managed, not relocated. Simply home, doing the ordinary things that make a life feel like a life. A home, buried in clutter, quietly works against exactly that goal in ways that rarely show up until something goes wrong. A fall over something that had been sitting in the same spot for years, a bathroom too crowded to move through safely, a kitchen where reaching for something ordinary requires a risk it shouldn't. None of the other 14 rules are really about tidiness. They're about protecting the thing that matters most, the ability to keep living safely and fully in the home you've already built a life inside of. That's not a small thing to get right. It's the actual point of all 14 rules before it. There is a specific kind of independence most people don't think to name until it's threatened. The freedom to get up in the middle of the night without turning on every light, to carry a cup of tea across a room without watching every step, to have someone over without a flash of anxiety about what they'll see or trip on. None of that requires a large home or an empty one. It requires a home where the space between you and wherever you're going is reliably, predictably clear. If you take exactly one thing from this entire video, let it be this. The 14 rules before this one are all in their own way, ways of protecting this last one. Objects that don't earn their place, kept anyway, are quietly borrowing against the years ahead. Years most people over 50 say, when asked directly, they want to spend exactly where they already are. Independence isn't stored anywhere dramatic. It's stored in the ordinary, unremarkable fact of a clear path from your bed to your bathroom at 3 a.m, in a kitchen where nothing has to be reached for dangerously, in a hallway that doesn't require memory to navigate safely in the dark. Every one of the 14 rules before this one, in some way, was really about protecting that. Most people don't think about independence as something stored in a hallway. They think about it as something abstract, a general wish to stay capable, stay in charge of their own days. but independence in the actual physical sense that determines whether someone keeps living safely in their own home is built out of exactly this kind of unglamorous detail. Not a single grand decision. 15 small, repeated ones, compounding quietly over years into a home that either supports the life still being lived in it, or slowly, invisibly, works against it. 15 rules. None of them dramatic on their own, all of them aimed at the same real target, a home that supports the life you're living now, not one quietly working against it. You don't need to do all 15 this week or even this month. Pick one, the one that's been sitting in the back of your mind since you started this list, and start there today. It's worth being honest about how this actually goes for most people who take it seriously. Not all 15 stick immediately. A few take root fast, the daily reset, the clear walkway, because they cost almost nothing to maintain once they're in place. Others, especially the emotionally loaded ones, take longer, and that's expected, not a sign anything's being done wrong. 15 rules attempted with real intention, even unevenly, produce more change in a year than a single perfect weekend ever could. Now, the thing I asked you to keep in mind at the start, the specific object from Rule 15, the one you thought of in the first minute of this video, go deal with that one thing today, not the whole list. Just that one. Everything else on this list can wait until you're ready for it. That one can't wait any longer than it already has. The rules on this list aren't really about having less. They're about making sure that what remains in your home is there because it's earning its place, used, loved, or genuinely needed, rather than simply because removing it never quite made it to the top of the list. That distinction, applied consistently, is what actually changes how a home feels to live in, far more than the total number of things in it ever does. Tell me in the comments which of these 15 hit closest to home and which one you're tackling first. I'll be reading. Subscribe. Every Wednesday and Saturday this channel goes deeper into what Japan figured out about living well. See you next week.